There seems to be an implicit assumption in modern liberal democracies that both democracy and capitalism constitute two sets of perfectly compatible principles, precepts which can be applied frictionlessly in tandem. This assumption leaks into the statements of prominent political figures, presidents, and intellectuals alike. The purported marriage of political and economic freedom was lucidly asserted by none other than Milton Friedman himself. In his book, Capitalism and Freedom, he wrote, quote, "Freedom in economic arrangements is itself a component of freedom broadly understood, so economic freedom is an end in itself. In the second place, economic freedom is also an indispensable means towards the achievement of political freedom." Unquote. But this purported bubbly relationship is not without its faults. In fact, much like a glamorous couple on the brink of divorce, who nonetheless regularly posts rosy pictures on social media for the sake of appearance, the relationship between capitalism and democracy is fraught with inner conflict. There is tension in it, despite the endless speeches and public affirmations of politicians claiming otherwise. In this video, I will provide a threefold formulation of such inconsistencies and the consequences they have for our political destiny. So first, unequal exercise of power. One of the hallmarks of capitalist liberal democratic societies is their purportedly objective division of public and private spheres. There is a public sphere where the exercise of power is held under close scrutiny and its excesses held accountable, and a private sphere where the realm of family life resides and the plane where economic transactions between consenting individuals is located. Another way of thinking about this is by using a political versus civil life dichotomy. In political life, everything concerning political rights, votes, and elections is held under the yoke of democratic principles. Civil life, on the other hand, is saliently excluded from these exacting democratic criteria, and therefore bears very little obligation to comply with principles of equal power. In other words, power is an exclusively political concept, and politics is only what happens inside of the state or public realm. Therefore, democratic principles, the rationale goes, have no business in the civil and economic realms, given their putative belongingness to the private sphere. As we will soon see, this artificial distinction is not only arbitrary but acutely troublesome. The central tenet of democracy, the equal distribution of political power among the citizenry, is not complied with under a liberal democratic capitalist society, the reason being that under nominally functioning democracies, political power, notwithstanding the accountability to which it is held in the public sphere, seeps into every corner of private life as well. If we use Merriam-Webster's definition of power, for instance, possession of control, authority, or influence over others, we'll quickly notice that the private sphere, which is putatively non-political, is in fact rife with structures of unequal exercise of power. The employer-employee dynamic, the teacher-student dynamic, the patriarch-family dynamic, and so on and so forth. And these are just a few of the many instantiations of this categorically undemocratic modus operandi. Yet, despite this, the prevailing narrative is one of a neat and clean separability between political and civil life. The realms of economic activity and social life are conveniently segregated to heavenly silos of impunity for the powerful, the bosses, the teachers, the patriarchs, and so on. If democratic principles are to be applied across the board, such inconsistencies must be somehow reckoned. Secondly, there is a clash of democratic rights and economic rights. There is an inherent tension between certain political rights, like freedom of religion and freedom of speech, and the right to engage in commerce without discrimination, which is an economic right. Avid defenders of capitalism often claim that the workings and dynamics of the free market conclusively lead to a color and racial blind economy, conducive to the fulfillment of the Enlightenment values of the universal worth of man and non-discrimination. To quote Mr. Friedman once again, when describing the benefits of a decentralized free market price system, he said, quote, "When you buy your pencil or your daily bread, you don't know whether the pencil was made or the wheat was grown by a white man or a black man, by a Chinese or an Indian. As a result, the price system enables people to cooperate peacefully in a phase of their life while each one goes about his business in respect of everything else." Unquote. Ironically enough, this same logic is the one that was used by gay couple Charlie Craig and David Mullins in Colorado, who, when trying to order their much-anticipated wedding cake at a local bakery, were met by the owner's unequivocal reluctance to provide the service on the basis that doing so would violate their religious principles. The case was initially taken to the Colorado Civil Rights Commission, which under the state's anti-discrimination laws ruled in favor of Charlie and David, asserting the transgression of their civil rights. The case, however, was later taken to the U.S. Supreme Court, where a 7-2 vote effectively reversed the decision taken at the state level on account of Colorado's alleged, quote, violation of religious neutrality. Needless to say, the case is quite controversial, and I'm not intent on persuading you to take a side. The broader point I want to get at is that an incomplete delineation of political and economic rights and clarification of which rights supersede which other rights and under which circumstances inevitably leads to the kind of tension and contradiction that was characteristic of the aforementioned case. A similar instance of a resulting clash between different rights took place in the famous Greensboro sit-in of 1960. In the middle of the civil rights movement, a group of 4 students from Greensboro, North Carolina were, as expected in the day, denied service at Woolworth's counter on the basis of their color. In an act of brave defiance, they doggedly refused to leave their seats, demanding equal treatment. As Samuel Bowles claims in his book Democracy and Capitalism, the logic that was used to support the Greensboro Four, as they were called, was ironically capitalist in essence. Such capitalist logic asserts that the utility of a good or service is divorced from the individual who provides it, his race, his gender, his personal history, etc. And this supposedly demonstrates the indiscriminate nature of markets. As Bowles writes, he says, quote, ironically, this staple of the liberal identification of capitalism and freedom, the anonymity of exchange and the irrelevance of the identities of the parties to a contract, was thus taken up in opposition to the right of exclusion generally conferred by the ownership of property, unquote. Taking this example into account, again, we have a pitting of right against right, a monumental tension between 2 compelling prerogatives and a disconcerting ambiguity surrounding the primacy of any given one of them. And thirdly, capitalism exacerbates economic inequalities. Capitalist economic systems exacerbate existing power inequalities within the citizenry. When one considers the cumulative nature of capital, it is not surprising that, as the Apostle Matthew said in one of the Christian Gospels, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. There is a certain inertia to the possession of capital that grants its possessors ever greater access to more and more opportunities. Conversely, starting out an enterprise with a dearth of capital, no matter how good your idea, necessarily implies a competitive disadvantage against those who do possess a substantial amount of capital wealth. These disadvantages manifest themselves most saliently in borrowing costs. If you take a hypothetical group of workers who, in the spirit of collective entrepreneurship, decide to quit the company they work at and venture off on their own to jointly form a democratically run enterprise, their predicament becomes ever more clear. When compared to their corporate competitors, the democratically run firm will at the very least have borrowing costs that exceed their competitors by at least a few percentage points. When viewed over the span of decades, the resulting cumulative difference in profit can result in the corporate enterprise, which is charged with lower borrowing costs, being twice as large as their democratically run counterpart. In short, firms without hierarchical power structures which distribute proceeds equally among unwealthy workers face significant disadvantages and are pretty much doomed from the get-go. It is thus in the nature of the capitalist economic structure itself to create an environment unwelcome to the amelioration of economic inequality, an environment that not only preserves but outrightly propagates existing power discrepancies between wealthy and poor, between affluent and despondent. This indubitably runs counter to the democratic imperative of equal exercise of power. Having gone over these inconsistencies, it's important to note that the previously mentioned list is anything but exhaustive. The contradictions inherent in the interplay between democracy and capitalism are copious and worthy of a significantly lengthier discussion. I nonetheless hope to have elucidated a few of the most important regularities residing at the heart of their dynamic. Please don't hesitate to let me know your thoughts in the comment section and like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video. Also, Don't forget to hit the alarm bell to get notified when new videos are released. See you later.